There in the House this afternoon, taking a lot of these questions for the government is Paul Fletcher. He's the Minister for Urban Infrastructure. But you wear two hats when you're in the House in question time. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Good to be with you.
So just explain this to us. Did the Prime Minister ask his department to ensure that he got 100 megabits per second internet speed at Point Piper?
David, a few points here. First of all, this was a perfectly standard arrangement. So, yes, the HFC installations have been paused for a little while the company works on dealing with a couple of issues. But orders which were in the queue were processed and the Prime Minister's order was in the queue. But the other really important thing is this. You know, Mr Shorten was quoted this morning as saying there was some problem because the Prime Minister was getting a first-rate 100 megabit per second service, yet the Shadow Minister, Michelle Rowland, was on Facebook just a few days ago calling the hybrid fibre coax, the HFC service of the kind the Prime Minister got, second rate. Labor needs to make up its mind.
It's first or second rate.
Labor needs to make up its mind. Labor has consistently criticised the government for using an HFC, the hybrid fibre coax, as one of the ways in which people get the NBN.
Okay, and it's
a service that delivers 100 megabits per second.
Which is terrific.
There are over 400,000 people who've got it.
Yep.
There's about 1.6 million people in ready for service areas.
Let's just rewind.
Yep.
So the Prime Minister's department asked the NBN to connect Point Piper?
Look, it was a perfectly routine order in the ordinary way that any customer places an order.
Well, why didn't he do it himself? A lot of people might be saying, well, hang on, I've got to go through the hoops of ringing and waiting.
Through your retail service provider, you place the order, and then in due course the NBN...
Why does the department do that for him?
Well, there's nothing out of the ordinary with that, nothing out of the ordinary at all. But the key point really is this. Labor cannot have it two ways. Either they have to give up this ridiculous argument that there's some problem with using HFC, something we decided to do in 2030. There's a huge contradiction. There's a glaring contradiction because Labor is hopeless on NBN.
Contradiction from Labor. But just if we can get back to this. Yeah. So the Prime Minister's department wanted to ensure that he had 100 megabits per second HFC connection. Did they know this pause was coming? This is a perfectly standard process. Did they know the pause was coming?
NBN announced that there was going to be a pause, but they also said that orders in the queue would continue to be...
Did they know this pause was coming?
Look, I'd need to go back and check that, but there's nothing out of the ordinary here at all. And the key point here is this. This 100 megabit per second service delivered over the HFC network, something that Labor has consistently criticised and quibbled and questioned. Michelle Rowland just a few days ago was calling the HFC second rate, yet today Bill Shorten is complaining that the Prime Minister is getting a first rate service. Labor can't have it both ways. Labor is all over the map on the NBN and they don't have a policy. Nobody knows what Labor is actually going to do. You know, at the last election, they said their policy was they were going to deliver an additional 2 million services on fibre to the premises as opposed to fibre to the node at $0 extra. That's magic pudding economics because a fibre to the premises connection costs around twice as much as fibre to the node. Labor has no clue what they're going to do on NBN and they had no clue what they were doing when they were in government and we had a terrible mess to fix up. One of the ways we chose to fix it up...
Let me just jump in. Just to cover this off, you're saying no special...
No. This is
Prime Minister's department...
It was a totally normal process, just like any other customer who
had put that Point Piper area had the same situation.
Can I make this key point to you?
Yeah.
The order had gone in quite some time before, well before NBN announced that there would be a pause on HFC, and it's in the same category.
And you didn't know, or you're not sure, whether they knew that pause was coming?
At the time they placed the order, they wouldn't have known, and nor would any other.
You said you'd have to check on that. You're saying they didn't know there was this.
The order was placed in the ordinary way, like any other customer. Sometime, that's what I'm advised. Sometime later, NBN took a decision that they would pause the HFC rollout, but they also said at the time that orders in the queue would be processed, and that's the situation that the Prime Minister was in.
Okay, and taxpayers are presumably paying the monthly... What is it, $120?
Well, indeed, as taxpayers pay for other costs associated with the Prime Minister, as they've done for Liberal Prime Ministers and Labor Prime Ministers from time immemorial.
And I think for ministers too. Do you get your internet?
Well, in fact, all members of Parliament get an allowance to cover the cost of a home phone and broadband connection.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, have you got the NBN at home?
I am in an HFC area, and so I don't have it yet.
Why not?
Well, because the rollout is being staged around the country,
right.
and
has it rolled out down your street?
There's certainly significant rollouts in my electorate of Bradfield. It hasn't got to my street yet.
Right.
My electorate is one.
Frustrating, isn't it?
Well, my electorate is one.
The PM's department to give them a buzz.
Well, I make the point. We took a decision in 2013 when we came to government that we would optimise the rollout strategy, go to a mix of fibre to the node, fibre to the premises, HFC. Why did we do that? One, to save $30 billion. Two, to get the rollout completed much more quickly. We are on track to get the rollout done by 2020.
There's been a cost blowout elsewhere. But look, let me leave the NBN. Come to your portfolio. Anthony Albanese reckons you've been underspending what you've announced in budgets for 3 consecutive years on transport and infrastructure. Is he right?
No, he's not. And look, a couple of key points. He tries to give the impression that we are spending less than Labor did. In fact, 2013 to 2021, 2013-14 to 2020-21, average spend per year around $8 billion on infrastructure under a coalition government. The comparable numbers over the 6 years of Rudd-Gillard-Rudd, $6 billion. So number one, we are spending consistently more on infrastructure than Labor did. In fact, we're spending $75 billion over the next 10 years. We committed in the first budget, brought down by Joe Hockey, that we would spend $50 billion by 2020-21, and we are well on track to do that. So that's the first point. The second point is there's always some movements as particular projects, the timing of payments moves from one period to the next. Now, there's a whole host of reasons for that. Let me give you one example. The Northern Road, part of the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, $3.6 billion. We're committing to that. Some payments have moved to a later period for the Northern Road. That's something I'm following very closely because it is one of the roads that will service the Western Sydney Airport, which we're also delivering by 2026. Now, that doesn't affect the fact that the road will be completed by 2020, and nor does it affect the total amount that we are committed to pay. Mr Albanese...
Let me ask you about a program that most Australians will be familiar with, the Black Spots program. Yeah. I think $220 million has been committed to that over 3 budgets. How much has actually been spent over those 3 years, do you know?
Well, the money moves around. I don't have those numbers to hand.
But it's only $105 million, so less than half.
But can I make the point? Mr Albanese...
Why is that?
Well, on all of these projects, we work with state governments and local councils, and from time to time, there are projects which slip. But Mr Albanese argues that if the project slips, the funding isn't going to get delivered. That is wrong.
That is wrong. For 3 years, it slips?
Well, these things move around all the time. You're managing very large numbers of projects around the country. Usually, they're delivered by either a state government, so Roads and Maritime Services in New South Wales, or by a local council. Now, inevitably, from time to time, there'll be projects where it was due to be completed and funding provided in, say, 2016-17. That slips to 2017-18. Even a slippage of 6 months can affect the aggregate numbers. But Mr Albanese's central claim that if a project is delayed, that the money doesn't get delivered, is wrong. Mr Albanese's central claim that we are spending less on infrastructure is wrong. We're spending more. And the other thing Mr Albanese consistently does is neglects to include in his calculations the very substantial amounts we are spending on equity and on debt. So, for example, Western Sydney Airport, $5.3 billion. Inland Rail, $8.4 billion. Equity injections, not grants to states, but still money on infrastructure. Now, Mr Albanese has been caught out misquoting a Parliamentary Budget Office report on that, specifically neglecting to include in a media release he put out the very next paragraph where the Parliamentary Budget Office made that point, that their figures did not include the substantial dollars we are spending on infrastructure in equity and debt. So there's a $2 billion concessional loan, for example, for WestConnex. So debt and equity as well as grants. If you only include the grant numbers, as Mr Albanese consistently does, you are giving a false and distorted picture of total Commonwealth spending on infrastructure.
Paul Fletcher, we do have to leave it there. Minister for Urban Infrastructure, thank you very much for
joining
us this afternoon. Now, Barnaby Joyce, we have